So you want some pro tips for pairing whiskey and cigars? I'm a whiskey enthusiast and also a cigar enthusiast that happens to work in the tobacco industry, so I feel like I'm uniquely qualified for this. So that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this episode. Stay tuned after the break and we'll get into it. So the weather's getting nicer, although here in Pennsylvania it went from like basically 60s to 90s in the space of a week because spring doesn't exist anymore. But I've been smoking more cigars and I've had some people ask how to figure out whiskey pairings with cigars. So I'm going to give you my guide in 4 easy steps. Let's talk about it. So step 1 is the basics. So cigar pairings can be really difficult because of the interaction that a cigar brings. One of my first pairing experiments was with Glenlivet and a Drew Estate Undercrown. Now, Glenlivet 15 is a decently malty scotch that also has some sweet vibes to it. And I remember the first time I paired that, it took all of those malt vibes out and just gave me like literal straight caramel candies. One of the wildest things that I've ever experienced. It got me to thinking, what parts of a whiskey are the cigars actually stripping out? And sometimes it's hard to judge exactly what kind of effect a cigar will have on a whiskey. So here's my first rule. Bold cigar or bold whiskey, but not both. A big, bold, chocolatey Maduro wrapped cigar is going to take a lot of the nuance out of a high-end bold whiskey. Sometimes that may be fine, but odds are it's going to bring out a lot of flavors that you didn't know were there. If it's a Claro, so a nice Connecticut shade wrapper, or a Candela, you want to give a big, bold whiskey. And if it's something darker like a Maduro, you probably want to go with something lower proof or a little bit more delicate. There are exceptions, but that's where I start. Now, part 2 is cigar blends. There are actual whiskeys out there that are blended to pair with cigars. There are a couple that come to mind. Highland Park has one. Old Elk has one. There's a brand new released Penelope one. There's Joseph Magnus. There's Starlight. All of those kind of have slightly different variations on what a cigar blend is, and there's basically 2 schools of thought when it comes to what a cigar blend is, but they both come down to big, bold flavors that won't be washed out by a cigar. So basically it comes down to either a fruit alcohol finish like a sherry, like a brandy, like an Armagnac, like a cognac, something like that, and usually multiple of those. Joseph Magnus is a great example. Those aren't really my favorite. If I'm going to do a cigar blend, I'm going to do the second category, which is generally wood-finished whiskey of some sort. Sometimes it's a French oak, sometimes it's an Amburana, which I get. Amburana is the cilantro of the whiskey world, and you either love it or you hate it. However, I think even if you hate it, you should probably try it with a cigar at least once, because even if you hate a whiskey, a cigar is going to change that experience enough that maybe you enjoy it with a cigar, and maybe you'll figure out liking it at some point in the future. Who knows? But bear in mind that they are not one-size-fits-all pairings. I actually think cigar blends play best with something like a Habano with a lot of earthy, peppery notes, because I think it really plays in that area really well. It stands up to the flavor, but it also adds a good bit. So if I'm pairing a cigar blend, I'm probably putting it with something like a Zeno Platinum or an Oliva Serie O or Serie V. And look, like I said, there's no one-size-fits-all approach here. It's going to be a little trial and error, but we'll talk about that at the end. So I think part 3 of pro tips for pairing cigars and whiskey is actually scotch. So I know the majority of people that watch me drink bourbon and probably hate scotch. I've seen the metrics. I can read between the lines. I know my scotch videos don't perform as well, but I'm gentleman in whiskey, not gentleman in bourbon. So I do try to continue that content because it's something that I love. And I think at some point, there's a scotch for everybody. Not all of them taste like dirty socks and Band-Aids. Also, if you didn't know, August is going to be Scotch month, and it will be all Scotch all month. Even if that's not something that appeals to you, maybe you'll stop by, continue watching my content because you like me, maybe, I don't know, and possibly learn something about Scotch. So it's going to be a fun time. We've got a lot of stuff on the docket, so check back in August for all that. Now, I think really honestly, Scotch holds up to a cigar better because there's a lot of nuance to it, and sometimes those like flavors that people don't like, like tastes like dirty socks, tastes like vomit, tastes like Band-Aids, tastes like burning car tires. I think a lot of those earthy, funky flavors get absorbed up by a cigar because at their base, cigars are an agricultural product and have at minimum, a little earthy, funky flavor. I think something especially peaty like a Johnny Walker 18 or an Isla like an Ardbeg or a Lafroig or a Bruichladdich will make for a great cigar experience because they've got similar flavors to the cigar, so it will bring out the nuance in them. One of the best budget pairings I've had in a long time was a Drew Estate Kentucky Fire Cured with an Ardbeg 10-year. It was like barbecue, and the extra smoky fire cured just brought out like a rich smoky apple flavor in the Ardbeg that is not something that I've gotten before and is honestly pretty nice. Also, if you want the like top end pairing of something with an Isla Scotch, I think a Davidoff Grand Cru with an Octomore, the one that I used was 15.3, is absolutely beautiful. It brings out all of like the creamy notes of that Octomore, which you wouldn't think normally because it's such a heavily peated whiskey, but the Grand Cru just really kind of pushed those flavors through, and it was awesome. So if you are looking for a decently expensive pairing for something, that's a really good one. All right, part 4. Have fun with it. It is going to be a learning experience because my palate is not your palate. There are going to be things that I suggest that you don't like. There are going to be things that I suggest that you will like. So I'm going to give you some really simple whiskey and cigar pairings here, sorted by cigar wrapper type. I'll give you some basic examples of what the cigar and the whiskey will play together as. Just know that your experience may not be exactly my experience, but these are as close to can't miss cigar pairings as I've got. So here we go. We're going to start with Maduro wrapped cigars. If you are not aware, Maduro is a dark type of wrapper. It generally has a lot of pepper notes, a lot of chocolatey notes. Some of them, like one I will talk about in here, have like an almost creaminess to them, which is really fantastic. First pairing that I'm going to talk about is Drew Estate Undercrown Maduro with a low-proof wood-finished whiskey like Maker's 46 or Woodford Double Oaked for a nice chocolate and brown sugar caramel flavor. Or if you're feeling scotchy, a Glenlivet 12 or a Glenfiddich 12 would bring out some really nice, delicate fruit flavors out of that, and I think will also be really fantastic. And then the one that I was talking about that is distinctly creamy is the Alec Bradley Magic Toast, and I would put that with some Knob Creek 9-year. You could also dial it up to Knob Creek 18 if you want to get like some really like cake icing sugary vibes. So those are 2 Maduro options. There's also Habano, which are Cuban type tobacco. You can get Habano tobacco in America. It's just not actually from Cuba. Generally, it's Dominican or Nicaraguan. Personally, for me, the Pro Habano pairing is not actually whiskey, it's coffee. Generally, a nice, like, oily medium roast is what I'm doing, especially if it's a cold brew. Got a lot of those creamy notes. It will play so well with the earthiness of a cigar. That's not the point of this video. This point is pairing whiskey and cigars. So here we go. Perdomo Habano has a bourbon barrel aged sun-grown, and I would pair that with a Four Roses Small Batch Select for an earthy floral pairing that will give you some big like springtime vibes, a little bit of crispness, maybe even a little honeysuckle. And then one of my favorite smaller cigar companies is Room 101, and they have an Ichiban or an Ichiban, whatever, with a Peerless Toasted for a nice Mexican vanilla vibe. And then finally, we've got the Claro, which I talked about earlier, is like a nice Candela green wrapper or an Connecticut Shade. I honestly am not a huge Candela person, not a fan of the funkiness and mustiness that it brings sometimes. So both of these options are going to be Connecticut Shade. Gentleman in Whiskey does a birthday every year, and 2 years ago our pairing was the Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust Sober Mesa Brulee with Nulu Ambarana, and I think it is one of the best cigar pairings I've ever had in my life. It was like big snickerdoodle vibes, and I loved it. If you are looking for just an absolutely fantastic cigar, and you want something maybe a little bit on the sweeter side, the Sober Mesa Brulee is going to be the cigar for you. And then in a similar wrapper, we've got the Fratello Oro, which is another fantastic cigar. And you can pair that with Sagamore Cask Strength for a nice sugar cookie. The cigar itself is really great, decent, like $7 to $10 stick, depending on where you're at. So that is my basic guide for pairing whiskey and cigars. I would love to hear what you guys think. If you have a go-to cigar and whiskey pairing, drop that in the comments, because not only would I love to try them, but I think other people would love to see them as well. If you end up trying any of these, drop a comment telling us whether or not you thought it was good. Report back. We love to hear that kind of content. What's coming up? So this Sunday, the 29th, we've got the 717 Bourbon Society guys on for a Bourbon Blinds with Friends. We've got Brian, Brad, Mike, and Uncle Dave, and it's going to be a fun time. They already have their blinds. I have a fun one in store for them. So stay tuned for that. The link will be right here. Definitely click that and hit notify me. And then coming up on the 6th, we've got the Bourbon Besties on with us. Chris and Sherry are going to be a fun time. If you want to support the channel, you can grab merch like this. This is our classic logo t-shirt. It also now comes in orange if you are a Flyers fan or just want an orange shirt. And if you spend $50, there will be a special gift in there provided you can prove that you're 21. So it might be worth putting in a $50 order. We also have memberships here on YouTube. We have memberships on Patreon for a sticker club and a sample club. I just gave out the month's samples to our 2 sample club patrons, and I added a little something extra from what we tasted this month. So if that sounds like something you want, definitely give that a look. If you like this content, check out our other videos. Please like and comment on this video and subscribe if you haven't already. And we hope you'll join us in drinking like a gentleman. Cheers. So I've been asked by a bunch of people in the last 6 months to make a video on how to pair whiskey and cigars, and seeing as I'm a whiskey enthusiast and I work in the tobacco industry, I decided it's finally time. So here's how to... I decided it's finally time. So here is my guide on how to pair whiskey and cigars. Stay tuned after the break and we'll talk about it. Okay, let's do that again. But better this time because not shitty.